Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this, where I am at a cloudy Friday here on the Cayuga Homelands in Ithaca, New York. My name is Jamaida Figueroa Vasquez and I'm an associate professor of Global Afro-Diaspora Studies at Michigan State University. And I am so happy to be able to be in conversation with these two authors today, as well as with Stephanie Bravo, a doctoral student in the Department of English at Michigan State University. Today we are going to be celebrating the publication of two books, Mercy Romero's Toward Camden. Oh, my background erases the visual of the books because they're the same. Okay, Stephanie has them, yes, Toward Camden, and Monica Huerta's Magical Habits, thank you. I do want to say that we will be having a giveaway of one copy of each book today. So we'll remind you a little bit later how you can get a free copy of this book that I will mail to you. We'll talk about that in a second. But first I want to open up the floor to Stephanie to talk a little bit about Electric Marronage.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry for the background noise. It just happened right now. I hope that y'all can hear me from wherever you are. So Electric Marronage is a group of Black, Brown, queer writers, artists who decided to plot points across the escape matrix. And they are inspired by ancestral petite marronage. They share your journeys and offer what we find along the way throughout this digital platform. The main curators of Electric Marronage are Dr. Jamaida Figueroa Vasquez at Michigan State University and Dr. Jessica Maria Johnson at Johns Hopkins University. So again, thank you for joining us here today. And let's welcome our guests with some emojis or something.
And I also wanted to say that we are being co-sponsored today by the Women of Color Initiative Project at Michigan State University, which is this incredible both university and community-based project that attends to the needs, preoccupations, and interests of women of color, students, staff, professors, and allies in East Lansing, Michigan. And so we're really happy to be joining them. We'll be dropping links to both Electric Marronage and to the Women of Color initiatives. There's so many incredible events that are both in person and also on Zoom. And this, again, is being recorded, so this will be available to our publics later. And then one quick thing about the book giveaway, what we're doing is we have a fifth person that is not appearing on the Zoom, who is upstairs right now, who will be taking a look at the Q&A, and they will be putting, like, so if you put a question in the Q&A, or a comment even in the Q&A, because I know not everybody will be like able to ask a question, leave a comment. They will be writing your name on a slip of paper and they'll be pulling it out of a hat before the end of the event. It is very low key. This is what we're doing. Yes, that is Takuma, the silent partner, who will be doing that for us. I'm really excited. So before we get started, let me introduce our two authors, our esteemed authors of the day. I'm going to begin with Dr. Monica Huerta, who is an assistant professor of English and American Studies at Princeton University. Her multidisciplinary work exposes the aesthetic life of power through visual culture, photography, and law. Her book, which we're talking about today, Magical Habits, published in 2021, won a Duke University Press Scholars of Color First Book Award, and is part of the new Writing Matters series at Duke. The 12 personal and critical essays in Magical Habits meditate on the relationships among self, place, property, logics, and storytelling. She also has a second book coming out. It's called The Unintended: Photography, Property, and the Aesthetics of Racial Capitalism, which follows the little explored trajectory of photography through late 19th and early 20th century law. It's coming out soon, and I can't tell you the date, but it is coming out soon. Her essays have appeared in J19, the Journal for 19th Century Americanists, Women in Performance, a Journal of Feminist Theory, Critical Analysis of Law, an International Interdisciplinary Law Review, Art Forum, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and American Literature. So thank you so much for being with us today, Monica. Our next esteemed author is Dr. Mercy Romero, who received her BA from Barnard College in English and her PhD from UC Berkeley in Ethnic Studies. She teaches American Literature and American Studies in the Hutchins School of Liberal Arts at Sonoma State University. In her writing and research, she is interested in place, making practices, structural abandonment, and the visual life of poverty, and how poetry and public art mediate a conversation about the nowhere sites of social suffering. Her first book, Toward Camden, was published by Duke University Press in 2021, thinks about Puerto Rican memory, demolition, and the built environment in post-1970s Camden, New Jersey, which is her hometown. What up, Jersey Ricans? She has also written essays on Black, Latinx social movements and archives. She's a former UC President's postdoctoral fellow. Presently, she is a National Endowment for the Humanities / Ford Scholar in Residence at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And she was awarded the incredible Flamboyant Foundation Arts Fund, sponsored by the Andrew Mellon Letras Boricuas Fellowship. So it is an incredible honor to have you both here. And as a personal note, I have crossed paths with both of these incredible women since I think for over 15 years as a graduate student at Berkeley in all of these zigzaggy ways. So it's a really beautiful moment to be able to celebrate your works in this way together. So what we're gonna do is we are going to start with a short reading from each author. Monica is gonna go first and read for us a little bit of her text. Mercy will then read a little bit of her text, and then we're gonna engage in Q&A. Please note that the Q&A and the comments are open. And if y'all want a free copy of this book, get froggy in the comments, get froggy in the Q&A. Thank you so much. And Monica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gamaida. Thank you, Stephanie. Love to Amanda, who couldn't be with us today. And hi, everybody. It's good to be here. It feels very special and like a very special honor to be here in a space that Gamaida and Jessica and everybody at Hopkins in Michigan who's involved helped build. So thank you for having me. I'm going to read a piece from the beginning of an essay called Before and After. It's the 7th one in Magical Habits. A photograph is like a poem. It betrays its limits by announcing that it is the limit, just a square, just some shapes and shadows, just the fictional, even literary appearance of a day in an instant of light, a generation, and then enchants us anyway. I looked at the pictures for a long time and kept hoping the story they had to tell would change, like a broken spell casting a new one. The waves of belief are waves in that they can wash over you and soak in, even when they are unclung to. I kept all the pictures of my dad in a notebook to lose and forget so that I could rediscover them on a day I couldn't predict, know that I had kept them to lose and feel all the time in between when I hadn't forgotten they were there. There could be so many faces in the house at once, and if his wasn't one of those, what good use did photographs have? They'd found their way into a box I packed up for college. When the photographs reappeared in my dorm room and I decided to look, I could have put them away again. They asked me to look in a mirror, the way an avatar might speak to you. It was grudgingly and with some anger that I noticed the pattern called resemblance. In one, my sister tugs at the loose flesh on his neck while making turkey noises, even though it wasn't Thanksgiving, even though we were in public, even though other people could hear, even though we were in Europe. When he turned to look at things, it was a second body sitting on his chest. It also turned to look. I couldn't guess what was in there, but I decided it was either another life or sounds that got caught. If it had been mine, I would have hidden all my wishes there. Can you guys hear that? Yeah, there's a construction upstairs, my bad. I couldn't guess what was in there, but I decided it was either another life or sounds that got caught. If it had been mine, I would have hidden all my wishes there, as if it were the wild wilderness in a fairy tale, so that I could rescue them and afterward return home to a cheery burst of golden trumpets. The fairy tale is the certainty of an end and a beginning, and the romance that a certainty like that can be pressed out from a living that's filled with much more quiet and mist and twilight particles. The fairy tale is the comfort of form, of the finite infinity implied by happily ever afters. The first time he shaved off his mustache, I was 9. It was my sister's quinceañera and he wore a tuxedo. He had shrunk by 250 pounds. I overheard that part, but what I already knew was that he was a different shape. His cheeks drooped above the tuxedo. He looked taller and more serious, processing down the aisle out of the church with my sister while the mariachi played Guadalajara. And by the time they got to the part where Guadalajara tasted like wet dirt, my grandmother cried and smiled at the same time. My grandmother made the dresses we were both wearing, and I tried to like the lace on mine, the pink ribbon around where my waist should have been, the flower corsage my mom pinned on me, the French braid, the teased and curls 1980s bangs in the fall of 1990. The party and the rest of the ceremony were in the ballroom of the Marriott in Oakbrook. He whisked my sister across the floor of the ballroom to the Blue Danube, then danced with my mother, who hardly looked at him, to everybody. The DJ started playing the Black Box song when it was his turn to turn the end of dessert into a dance party for my sister's high school friends and the business friends he wanted to impress with a 200-person party. He had changed shape since the Turkey picture, and his voice might have changed pitch too. I noticed during his speech before everybody, in choir, I learned a person can manipulate how sounds come out beyond the volume, can affect the shape, the brightness, the height. I wasn't sure yet which parts to hold tight or how to control volume without seeming to make it easier for those listening to only pay attention to how the sounds made them feel. The way part of the work of craft is to become something else, to make something other and else. I liked the word shape only when it became a verb. I could do much later. He thanked the guests for coming. He wished my sister a happy birthday with his new voice coming from his new shape. My mom's bangs bounced as she walked up to meet him, and they were fluffy, and all three of ours matched. He invited everybody to the dance floor, and I was embarrassed he made the joke. My cheeks got red from dancing in white tights. I still cannot do the Roger Rabbit or the running, and no one also has asked me to recently, so it's fine. I found a place to nap with all the coats because no one was as ready as I was to go home, so there was no point in asking. 2 decades later, I watched the video from that night with my mom. Neither one of us spent that morning fluffing bangs, so part of me started to believe, faintly, in progress. The video, I thought, could help me see whether resemblances fade. She'd brought it with her because I asked her to. Ay, ¿para qué quieres eso, Mónica? Just to watch it, I said, as though that were a benign sort of thing to do. When sleeping next to my mom, I liked to wrap my legs close around hers. I liked to press my back against her stomach, soft and warm, somehow spacious, somehow loose, how I thought, incorrectly, all mothers' stomachs must be, as proof. Around her stomach, the skin accordioned with stretch marks and rested in what looked like whispers. I thought I could hear against the tops of her thighs. It looked frayed sometimes, that skin, and other times like work, like the strenuous work of echo. I pressed back into it, and there was space for me. I liked her arms around me and her breath on my hair. I thought my skin would never be that soft, and I asked her why. Ay, Mónica, ponte cremita. Síguete poniendo cremita y ya verás. Your skin will get soft. I wondered whether first I needed a stomach as proof before I earned skin that's soft, whether there were other ways of being soft, whether each time we had to figure out what it meant to be a mother and to be a child, unfolding one another into time. Is that enough?
Thank you so much, Monica. Mercy, I'm going to have you read now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Monica, for reading first. That was beautiful. You can hear me good? Okay, I'm really happy to be here with you all. Thanks for folks who showed up to help celebrate our books. I'm reading from chapter 2. I was looking through this last night and trying to figure out what I should share, and I couldn't figure anything out. But today, this seems, I don't know, like it's gonna work. In the distance of one of Camilo Vergara's candid neighborhood images, filed under Decayed Neighborhood, you can locate the lot at North 27th and Lincoln Avenue. In one of its incarnations, after the Mischief Night fires of 1991, that lot was a garden. Some years after the ruins of the house were demolished and after most of the boys from our neighborhood vanished, some inside prison cells and others to early death, college students from the local branch of Rutgers University came and planted another view. The lot was fenced and reimagined as a community garden project, which I suspect is more and more how abandoned or vacant spaces get reimagined in the ghetto, achieving futurity. As beautification, rehabilitation, and workfulness, an urban garden brings the values of productivity back into public view and casts urban youth as environmental stewards or pioneer farmers. It connects them with the ground as frontier. I saw the garden for only a season. It was full of raised beds, city corn, and flowers. It was very beautiful. When I spoke to my sisters, we wondered about its fate. For us, the garden was an unbelievable beauty, and it faded over a year or so unworked. After the garden died and the lot was a place of remains once again, people began to cut through the lot to walk down the street. So many feet cut a soft footpath in the dirt, a rich and bleak reminder maybe of how differently people reimagine or reckon with abandonment, or that a relation with the ground is forged, made beautiful, not just with hands that work tools, but also with running, walking, or stumbling feet. On February 1st, 2009, a young man was shot and killed at the intersection of North 27th and Lincoln Avenue, the site of the empty lot. I was some months pregnant on that night, and just before the shot, I felt the quickening, the bit of electricity that is the first felt sign of movement in utero. I went upstairs to get to my cell phone and whispered to my boyfriend all about it, and I was rocked by a gunshot blast on the other side of the window. I recall the former and latter movements and moments together because it was traumatic. One moment props up the next. The next afternoon, the young man's family came there to grieve him at this spot. He had been named Lewis. He was 27 years old. This is the median age in Camden, 27. I was 27 when I found myself so lost that I had to come back to Camden to recover. He was African-American and Puerto Rican, like most of the people who live in this town. That afternoon, my mother walked across the street to join his sister and cousins and friends where they gathered along the edge of the lot. I couldn't manage the walk. My mother worked as a teaching assistant at our elementary school, Washington School, just around the corner. And when he was in 4th grade, he had been a student in her class. He had just returned home from prison when he was killed. A little spirit house was put there with candles and balloons, and people were drinking all day. In wondering after the topography of an open ground, a repertoire of nonviolent movement, of falling, I begin again here. On that day, I had just arrived home and I told my parents I thought it was time for them to get out of there. My father made a sweeping gesture and told me that all this was going to change. You wait and see, Merce, in 10 years, this will all be different. I didn't say anything, but Dad was right. 10 years later, and we'd all be gone. Our house boarded up, something I could not imagine, although it surrounded us. That night, the young man was shot and killed in front of my parents' house. I pulled back the curtains and saw the white minivan idling there in the middle of the street. The lights were still on in the van, and this made it seem unreal. The fire engines were there for a long time that night. I laid next to my 4-year-old son, who had been asleep just above the shooting in the bedroom I once shared with my sisters, our girlhood perch. Feeling the electric currents of another pregnancy, the room alight in the reds and oranges of silent sirens, and I watched them hose down the curb. My father was the first to leave, and his old age war trauma gave him the urge to run, and so he ran for a season, spring 2010, and we couldn't find him, and he was just lost just about everything he had brought with him, and then everything he owned. My sisters urged our mother to leave the house and to stay with them. They were convinced that alone her movements, her comings and goings were leaving a vulnerable, invisible trail. Their house sits empty now, foreclosed. So little left to pay, but still too much. Someone stole into the basement not too long ago and took all the copper pipes. When my mother went to check on the house, she was knee deep in water. Some of my favorite words: locate and join, at, with. You might say with so-and-so, and at would tell you when or where. This is so you could know when she is coming back, like at so-and-so time, so she could be at home with you. But now maybe you can't get home, maybe your home is destroyed. But that happens there, you know, in Camden. Someone can just go in and rip it all out, the precious metals, swing a sledgehammer, maybe a chair, into the walls. They will tear like paper, extract all the copper pipes, take them to the junkyard for sale and melt down. That happened at your house when you were gone, when we were all gone, when you weren't there anymore, when you weren't together anymore. So are they still your favorite words? Yes, I think so. They can still bring it all back. When your house is gone, are you still going to stay there? Yes, I think so. The house sits and the land shifts. had to attend to this place in the light of the kind of losses and lives lived here. Juanima Lubiano writes that remembering is, quote, enlarging a space where before there prevailed simply an account of ghetto violence. These lots and empty houses are enlarged spaces, spaces of remembrance in everyday life, what people have been left with to invent, survive, fight, walk through, invent to walk to survive what they have been through and left with. I was looking out of windows and writing. I thought I remembered, saw, and reset things that way. What we could lose is humbling. Turned out, seeing it all again from the other side of property. We are boarded out of the little broken down house, access given up or refused, but this familiar earth, it comes back to us. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mercy. I'm gonna bring us together and yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie, do you want to start us off with a question?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for sharing these stories of home, from the vacant lots of Camden, New Jersey, to Salvador's restaurant in Chicago. It's interesting that both of you pull from your fathers. So sometimes you cite full letters or even text messages. So I'm wondering about the process of curating these documents into your books. How they go from being saved in trash bags, for example, in the case of Dr. Romero, to the making of this very public act that is a book, right? So have you had conversations with your families about these archives that you're demonstrating within the book? Are there any preoccupations or tensions? Or can you reinstate this importance of this very specific archival approach?
You want me to go first? Yeah, okay. So I think part of what was maybe a little bit different in my process, actually, I don't super know, but I'm gonna make an assumption and then Mercy, tell me if I'm wrong. But because I started writing about my family in college through like a senior thesis project, that meant that it was very sort of a collaborative process of compiling at one point, just like going to my my mom's house and the restaurants and just like I just took things. So there was, and also I asked for some things as well, because some things my mom like had in the house and I asked her if I could have it. And so that like culminated in the thesis. And then I think it's still in my closet, like a huge duffel bag of things. So I still have all of that somewhere, a bunch of things I didn't use, like little slides for projectors. I don't know why my parents had them, but they have like tons of these slides of pictures of the restaurants. So that was like the restaurant stuff. And then the monologues that are in there, part of them, I told you, Myra, this a couple days ago when we did a different event, part of them started again collaboratively with my dad when I thought that I was writing a novel. So this was after college, like probably a few years after college. And so the fictional monologues arise from some of those conversations that he and I had. There's like one phone conversation in there too, which was a phone conversation that we had that I didn't record. And then I sort of edited it over the years. And then I was working on it for so long that I don't remember everything else. But the book coming out, I told you about this a couple days ago too, was something that I told my family pretty much after I was done with copy edits. So they didn't really know that I had been working on it the whole time that I had been working on it. They knew that I wrote the thesis, that I did this degree, and that I like did a job with books, but I didn't tell them that the first book was going to be about them until I was done with copy edits. And my mom, who I am in touch with, I think she was okay. I mean, she read it and it made her sad. So it's hard, you know? My dad, who I wasn't in touch with for a really long time, yeah, he had a more vexed reaction to it, which sort of makes sense given, you know, the topics of the book. So that was, I don't know that that was harder because there's just less of a relation there. But it was more vexed, and not, but like, you know, what kind of reaction does a narcissist have when like things are said about them that they don't think is positive, right? So like it was never going to be a positive conversation, but that's because of narcissism. I think it's not because of the book. So
Yeah, thanks for going first, Mike. Thanks for the question, Stephanie. I grew up hearing my parents' stories. They're storytellers. So my father told us all of his stories from his childhood and also from his experiences in Vietnam. And the letters that I grew up reading that were kept, my mom kept them in the trash bags, which I read about. But those letters, we just don't know what happened to them once we lost the house. So that was just the letter that I put in there was the only one that we know where it is. My mom has it. But I did ask permission, of course, from my father, if I could use a letter in there. And he was like, yeah. My mom, they're pretty tickled by it. You know, it for me putting it in there is kind of cool for them. My father is so brilliant and probably better writer than me, but just didn't have the same opportunities that I have been given through the work of all the generations before us, right? So I think for me putting that letter in there was just like, I wanted my father's voice in the letter, and I wanted my mother's. She texted me about it, so I put that in a footnote. I wanted their writing alongside mine. I've been doing research at the Schomburg and also at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, and sitting with other people's things, their archives, and being at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, Yomaida in particular, man, that's just, it's so beautiful to be in a space where things are kept, Puerto Rican stuff, you know, and having access to that. So it makes me really happy that some of our families, we had a lot of stuff, but it got lost when we lost the house. So having those dedicated spaces for our archives is so important. And I hope that a place like the Center for Puerto Rican Studies is always supported and that they just pop up everywhere, you know, for what it's worth. It's a different kind of archive.
Yeah, I think you are both, these books for me talk to each other in these really beautiful ways. And I hope it's not just me reading them, you know, having read them together. But there's a way that it remaps, maybe even like rethinks what we can do in Puerto Rican studies and in like Chicanx studies, right? Like, particularly Monica, like your scholarship has been on like photography and law and all of these other things. And then this pops out of your heart and out of your mind in this different way, and speaks to a series of different fields, right? But I'm wondering what and how you're thinking about this in relationship to the kind of broader questions of ethnic studies, Puerto Rican studies, and Chicana studies, the question of storytelling and writing within like this. And I have like a question about the mixed genre of this, but that's not the question. But the question is like, how do we think about this as a moment, as a mark, as a different way to think about doing the work from this locus of enunciation?
thank you for that question, sweetie. So that was, I mean, in some ways, because Latino studies, ethnic studies wasn't the training that I got in graduate school, that is not like, it's not that it wasn't at the forefront of my mind, right? So like what was at the forefront of my mind when I was making the book was like not claiming that expertise actually, right? So like making a book where that's not what I was claiming was my field, because it hasn't been. while also knowing that like my lives crisscross the concerns of the field because of where my people come from. And that my thesis, which I was like, you know, including in bits and pieces, was bound up in some of the questions, but it was also bound up in the questions that fields were asking in the early 2000s. So like, I tried to be as mindful as I could. And, you know, people in the field will tell me where that succeeded and where that didn't, but I tried to be as mindful as I could of distinguishing, you know, with the font choice, with the footnotes between like, this is like not something that understands itself as like a contribution to a present in a field, even if, you know, I'm around people. So, and I've been reading things, even though there will be resonances. So I thought more broadly about archive actually, and about history, and the ways that, you know, scholars have been thinking about archive across studies of race. So I thought with Saidiya Hartman, I thought with Laura Merlant, I thought with Katie Stewart, with Stephen Best, obviously, who you know was my advisor. And so I wrote with those questions in mind about my life, which was going to crisscross the concerns of Latinx studies, but not actually knowing. So it's been actually really wonderful that classes, I can't remember who, someone taught it in a Latinx performance studies class, grad class. Someone's teaching it this semester in a Latino Lit Now class. And that all just feels like a real gift and a real honor, that it's being taken up and feels useful. But that, yeah, that was sort of some of my thinking, like, okay, I was writing about cultural history of Mexican restaurants when I was 21, but how can I frame it so that everybody knows that I understand that it's a kind of humble offering of like an intimate archive, more than I think of that part of the work, or of the book as scholarship that is speaking to what fields are concerned with now. And then thinking more broadly about the writing as trying to make a contribution to a cross-field thinking about genre and archive, and a more holistic approach, or the kinds of more holistic approaches that people take when archives are insufficient, not well supported, not gathered, not documented, etc. And how, you know, people who are bending, you know, ficto criticism, or however you want to call it, close narration, whatever the ways people are bending writing to try to account for historical insufficiencies, absences, elisions, was part of what I thought, you know, my use of fairy tale, or my use of like collaging writing was trying to contribute to.
Did you want me to answer that question? Remind me, was that for Monica? Was it for both of us? Okay, I thought you were Dr. Monica. So. Yeah, I just write. I mean, I've been writing since before I was affiliated with a university, and I feel so fortunate to have done my training in ethnic studies. I went there for a particular reason. I needed to be around faculty of color. Like, I didn't want to be a minority anymore. School, college, that's what it was. So Pat Hilden was one of my advisors, and she wrote a book called When Nickels for Indians, I believe. And then Saidiya Hartman's Lose Your Mother. It's like super, yeah, shout out to Berkeley Ethnic Studies. Saidiya Hartman's Lose Your Mother is just like, wow, you know, it just, these folks opened up space for us, I think, you know, as teachers, as writers, as fellow writers. So I tend to think with the people that I come across, and less with academic or field specific kind of stuff. I mean, I know it, but I think that for me, it would bind me up. And for this book, I couldn't do that. I had to kind of let myself go. It just was going to come out that way. Even if I try to make it let me answer a specific, let me speak to the field in this particular way. But of course, like I said, Gloria and Saldu, I mean, there's such deep tradition of women of color doing a particular kind of writing and allowing themselves vulnerability and trusting the writing world, themselves, their sisters. And I feel a part of that tradition that's bigger than an institution, So I got to keep myself there if I want to keep writing, which I need to keep writing because I don't know how else to be in the world. So the work we do is the work we do, but it's bigger than, what I mean, which is probably ethics study, right? That's what I feel like that's what we learn there. No, Maida?
Yeah, for sure. It's bigger than the fields, than the discipline, than the.
It's bigger
right?
than the
There's
institution.
so much, yeah, the institution. There's so much in your works, both of you, that is like the work of memory, and it's really, as reading your books is a beautiful experience, but it's also really hard because it's like really tender in many ways, and then it's really enraging. Like there are moments that are just kind of take your breath away, and you can feel the kind of unfairness, the injustice, the pain, right, the hurt, like in your bones, you feel it. And I think that there is something very particular about not just anyone's active writing, but your active writing and the kind of tradition that you're both working in, that offers that. I think that's just so important. And the fact that they're coming from these different perspectives and point of views. Like, first of all, like thinking about like Puerto Ricans in Camden, working poor and working class communities, right? Like that point of view, and particularly like the kind of coming together of like Puerto Rican and African American communities, right? In this beautiful way that also is marked by so much state and local violence, right? And then in Monica, like Mexican family in the Midwest, you know what I'm saying? Like, and it's a whole different thing. It's like this like entrepreneurial, like, upper middle class family, this, and then what you get out of those experiences are different and yet mirror each other. I don't know. I could just talk about it for a long time. There's something beholding about how distinct those kinds of points of views are, and how they can speak to each other in these ways across some really important differences, right? I know, Stephanie, you have another question? Yeah, okay. And then we also have a question in the chat, in the Q&A too, so we'll take that one also. Go ahead, Steph.
Yeah, I was also thinking through this migration toward Camden that's already embedded with like a certain racialized history, right? You talk about the murder of Rafael Horacio and then framing from that position, right? And then Dr. Huerta going back to those childhood memories of being in the restaurant and having these tensions at a young age about class, right? Thinking about even like your father's belt buckle versus like what is a hairnet. So yeah, I don't know if that's like a question or a comment. Do you think you could tap into that, or should we move to something else?
I kind of like that.
Yeah. About class, if that helps. I feel like it took me to getting to college not to understand that class was a thing, because that would mean that I couldn't like see. So like no, but to understand like how class came together and came with a series of assumptions and expectations internal to it and external to it, and also a series of like modes of affiliation, some of which made sense to me because of where I came from, and some of which didn't ever make sense to me because I was the Mexican girl in the class, even though I was a Mexican girl in the class who had a similar kind of house as other people in the classroom, and also in the class. So that was a lot of the learning that I feel like I did in college, was trying to parse like ethnicity and nationality and class. And then I think part of where I tried to write the book from was, one, obviously centering exactly where I came from, because I also write like in college and elsewhere, and since then, and still, there are all kinds of assumptions that I'm met with because of being Mexican about what my life was before now that are not the case, right? And it has been important to me to center and always claim that those are not the experiences that I come from, for all kinds of reasons. And so where I tried to write the book from was, one, again, centering that, and also centering how that shaped not only my experiences, but also my worldview, and also what it meant to come to a politics that aspired to more than the reproduction of class difference, and that aspired to a world that was better than just, I mean, with as much filial love as I'm capable of to my father, like that aspired to more than just like, I want to make as much money by selling large burritos as possible. So that, I feel, was like my political education, was like, how do I occupy the space, exactly the position that I come from, while also, contributing in whatever ways that I can, and with my work, hopefully, to a world in which actually the horizons of the possible are more equitable for people, regardless of whether their father figured out how to be a capitalist or not. So that's what I have to say about class and writing from a classed position as a Mexican American Chicana girl.
You good, Mercy? Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what to say. Yeah.
Monica, I really love that you can like balance something that is like so so complex in like Jessica's comment, and in actually quite a funny way. But the menus, yeah, there's all this, Stephanie put in the menus. I put AKA where's your abuela? How was gang life? You know what I mean? Like all of these things that people want to project onto you, and yeah, but I think it's, yeah, thank you. We have a question in the Q&A. This is from Olivia Brown. Thank you, Olivia. Olivia says, this was a really beautiful reading from both books. I agree. I love the stories you told through your poetry. My question is, what would you recommend for new poets who might want to write similar themes, family, etc.? What was your process? And there was a clarification. It's like, Olivia just means writers in general without reading off a page. She couldn't tell if it was poetry or like a narrative book. So I think that says something also about the kinds of writing that y'all are engaging. So yes.
Do you want to take it, Mercy, on advice to a young poet?
Yeah, well, just keep writing. I mean, yeah, I don't really have any advice. I mean, I think if you're identifying as a poet, you know what you gotta do, what you gotta do. I think if you're thinking about what it means to bring all the different ways that you write, and you want to bring that as an offering to the world as a book, that's a beautiful thing. In terms of making a book and choosing to make it kind of like an academic book, the university press, I think that of course, there's people working and clearing space for us in ways that are so important, and it's just a good time to be doing this kind of work. It's necessary. Like echoing at what you said a little while ago. There's a kind of tenderness at work, and of course in Monica's book and in mine as well, And then there's for me with this book, sometimes I'm like, well, damn, like that was terrible. That was terrible. I still feel so, I felt like I came to a kind of peace with what I was after, why I needed to write. And then I have it, but sometimes I just, we feel the ways that that loss continues to structure my parents in particular, their fate and future. And it's just not right. So I get really upset. And then just keep going. So I think poets are incredibly important to me for keeping in the world, for myself, keeping my life going. Poetry has marked every part of my existence, from the people that I've loved, and like I said, you know, who I read and who I learn from. So poets write your books, you know. I mean, it's just necessary. Thank you for your question. I hope that's helpful.
Moni, anything?
I think I would just add, it's okay if it takes time to figure out what to say and what not to say. So this is something that with Yamira, we were talking about a couple days ago, and that I thought about a lot too when I was writing the very long time that I was writing my book. And I think it's a really hard, especially if you're writing about, you know, like Mercy was saying, if you're writing about things that are tender and close and have effect, or are bound up in continuing effects. I think it's okay if it takes a while to figure out what to say and what not to say, and give yourself the license and the permission to take as much time as you need to know, and to be okay with not knowing. So like, it's also okay if what the process means, or it's okay if what it means to write a book or a poem is something that doesn't look like writing a book or a poem for a very long time. It can still be writing a book or a poem, even if it looks like taking walks, giving yourself like voice memos, reading, finding ways of making yourself happy in a world that's falling apart. All of that is also writing your book, and all of that is also writing your poem. So I think, yeah, I mean, it was important to me for that book. It's important to my photography book that I can't finish, to give myself time to figure out when I'm done. And, you know, the best advice that my friend gave me like a month ago was like, you'll know when it's time to let it go. So don't pressure yourself to be done with something because you want to have done it, if that makes sense, right? Like, we want to have done things, and so that can like make us rush. I'm saying this 100% to myself. So it's okay if it takes time to know what to say and what not to say. That's all.
Speaking of that, I have like a super quick question, and it's like a one sentence, because I think, you know, we see these books, they're done, they're in the world, they're out there, and people are reading them, and the public is reading them, and students are reading them, and faculty are reading them, and you know, and whoever. How long did it take you to write this book? Because I think people might be reading these kinds of things and being like, oh, well, must be nice to be able to finish a book, right? Like, maybe I can never do this, right? So in terms of thinking about experimental writing and the process, all of those things are embedded in this. But how long did it take you to do this book? Both of you. And then there's 2 questions in the Q&A.
There's writing in there from when I was 18. So that was 22 years ago. And there's writing that I did up through copy edits. With apologies to the copy editor who worked on my book. Thank you, Dookie P. So yeah, so 22 years. Yeah, copy editors for the win, always MVPs, unsung heroes.
I think I had different kinds of writing that I was doing and I just brought it together, but it took quite a while. It's not my dissertation, so I wrote it after grad school, but I teach a lot at Sonoma State. We have a very heavy teaching load. It's lovely to work with students, but it requires a level of commitment and energy. And I've got kids and I'm tired. So I tried to work it into my life. So I wrote here and there on trips and, you know, buses, right? Like outside whenever I could on my phone. So I don't tend to think about it in terms of time, but more like space, you know. And then I finished and I held on to it for quite a while because I just, as Monica was saying, I felt like I'm done. It wasn't, I wrote it and I got, okay, I get it. And I'm good now. I can put it away and I've got to give it in to the press, which is my bad. But I wasn't ready to let go. And then one day I was ready to surrender it. And that is an interesting thing. And I'm grateful that that day arrived and that I was able to get it out to the world. And thanks for people who are reading it.
Thank you both for those answers about the question of time and space in writing the book. And also thank you both for like releasing the books from your clutches and sending it out into the world. I deeply relate to that feeling of like never wanting my writing to see the light of day. So thank you. And I think oftentimes people will, like I said, I just ask because people think there's an assumption, you see the book, it's done, and it's like, oh, well, that person is just magical. You know what I mean? They're just a unicorn, they did it, you know? And there's all of this anxiety that comes around, right, producing it. Stephanie, do you want to ask the question in the Q&A? I think Chris's question.
Yes. How does photography influence your writing? Why are images special to you? What is the difference between a photograph and a poem?
So I've been talking a lot about my astrologer this week, but here we are. My astrologer said that I write about photography because I'm a Cancer. So I am over determined to be nostalgic and meditative and like a little bit. Are you showing my picture, Yomaida?
I'm trying to, but I can't. Like my background has spoiled me. Yeah. So, yeah.
I am. Yeah, so
Stephanie,
like,
Stephanie, page 52. Page 52. Go ahead.
So that's what my astrologer would say. I would say that I thought that I was going to write my dissertation about modern death rituals and silence, and maybe one day I'll write that book. But that is why I started thinking about photographs, was because I was interested in death and silence and quiet. And photography is a way to be, right, like this is what Eduardo's new book is all about, Paper Gravers, and it's what so much photography criticism is about, being close to photography as a kind of being close to death masks, a stopping of time. And so I think that's why intellectually, or like in my intellectual development, I was interested in photography. I think I'm interested in photography still, because that's I say this in Magical Habits, and I think it's true. It's the desire to stop time is one that I think continues to feel really bewitching. And that's to me what a photograph is. It's like, it's a bewitching that at some point you might be able to stop something either from happening or before it happened, or to like affect, you know, the space-time continuum in some way. And photography, like for a second, satisfies the sense that we might be able to, and really, right, like, and politics is like the hope that maybe we can. So
Yeah, thanks for the question, Christopher. I try to think alongside Camilo Vergara's photography work in Camden. So he's been doing it for so long. It's so beautiful. And I think for me, you know, being from Camden and seeing his work is just like, he made available a kind of beauty that resonated with me. And it kind of also made a home for the kind of writer and writing that I've done in this book, actually. So I think that there's a way that, you know, that his photography inspired me. And then the cover of the book, which I feel so fortunate and thankful that this was able to be the cover of my book. It's the title of the image by Simmons is appear, appease, applaud, also perhaps maybe. That just there's poetry in that title for me, and I found that to be like a sister to my book. So I feel really close to the image, to image on the cover of my book, of course, and influenced by photography. And then I think my relationship to image is to photography is very much mediated by my own sense of poetics and being in the world. So I look with and through poetry and poetic image in some ways to understand the visual life of a photograph, particularly as it relates to Camden, if that makes any sense.
And you know, Mercy, the thing is about your book is that the cover is so striking. And thank you, Stephanie, for making that connection between Camden and Compton, because Stephanie also studies public art and visual culture in Compton. But and then the inside of the book, there's just one photo. It's the photo of the prison, right? But then it's so funny to me because I just like skimmed through it again and I was like, oh, there's only one photo here. And yet when I think about your book, I have only images in my mind. I can see the lot, I can see the house, right? Like I can see the bench where you're sitting, like I can see it. And so I'm like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of photos in here. And I'm like, oh no, there's just one. Like what
well,
was I imagining? Cool. Yeah.
I like that, young Mina. Thank you for sharing that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead, babe. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say there's something interesting that you're doing with geography and images in the book. And the kind of taking up of geography. The discipline, but not the discipline, you know, that I think is really important. And people have marked that in talking about your book.
Cool.
Okay, Stephanie, next question.
The one in the, okay. Can you say something about the types of relationships that sustained you in writing these important works?
Everybody that I've ever met. Like literally everybody that I've ever met, because it was such a long time that this was like happening, that everybody that like the people that say hi to me at the grocery store, like my colleagues, every friend I've ever had. There were a few people who actually read parts of it. So they were maybe the closest to it. My friend Ale read it maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and he helped me switch the order of the essays to something that made more sense. My friend Megan from grad school read it when it was still a novel, and made me think that it wasn't dumb. My friend Carolyn read parts of it and she was like, no, you need epigraphs at the beginning of every essay. And so that's when I added those. I feel like other people read it. Oh, my friend Dina read it and she actually asked me to be clearer about the role of class in the book. That was her very first question. That was probably, where did I live? That was probably like 5 years ago. Yeah, so those are some of the friends who were the closest to it, but I really feel like because it was with me for so long that like everybody that I've ever met like played a role in me, definitely in me staying okay for that long, but also just in me having like emotional resources to be able to keep working on something that I most of the time I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, that's the same, but it's a really beautiful question, Takuma. Thank you for asking it. I think about like the function of acknowledgements in a book, and I felt like I gave so much of myself, but also shielded myself appropriately with this book. And then I was very careful about the acknowledgements to kind of keep private my relations. So, but certainly there's a, you know, same. I've got benefit from so much support of friends and even, you know, my children in some way changed my disposition in the world and my sense of myself as a writer and as a mother, and how am I gonna make time to do this, you know, because motherhood it's tiring. But I think figuring out a way to keep writing and making that work alongside having my particular children and knowing that they're rooting for me is it I'm so grateful for that sense of my motherhood relation in particular, and certainly my partner doing the work of caretaking when I went away to go to Camden. Right.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think it's like expansive in a way, you know, each book has a section of like acknowledgements. And you know, you get to write whatever you want. I know my acknowledgements are like extremely long, you know, like but
They're
you know,
lovely.
often they, you know, you miss out on stuff, you forget stuff, you know. So this is really great to kind of think about like what sustains us, right? As we're going through this process. I'm just wondering, I mean, like, if y'all have any kind of questions for one another, or anything you want to share with one another or with the audience, with folks who are thinking about, I mean, y'all talked about folks opening space for the kind of writing that you're doing, but I really feel like y'all are opening up, you're opening up that same kind of space for writers who are thinking about like intimate and political topics, right? So I just think this is so exciting, and I know for a fact that I wanted my students to read your works and to be here to listen to the possibilities of what you can do. For both of you, first books that look like this, it's like so fucking powerful, you know. So I don't know if you have any comments to share. We could wrap it up too. So
Can I ask a question? Mercy, is it okay if I ask you a question?
I guess it depends on the question.
Word, no, totally. Well, I'll
So go
ask
ahead.
it. No, I'll ask it and then you can decide if it's something you want to answer. And I promise, I will not take it personally if you decide not to. I promise. Yeah. It's
Oh,
like,
good.
no.
Go ahead. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, it's good.
Okay. Okay. So you talked a little bit, I can't remember if it was in the answer to the last question or the one before, but you talked about ways that you shielded yourself in the writing or with the writing or in the process. And that was something that I thought a lot about too, because I didn't want, yeah, there were things that I didn't want to give, like very specifically and emphatically had no desire to give over. So I'm just curious about how you thought through that, or if you had like, did you have like, you know, a metric, or did you have like, was it something in the writing practice itself that helped you shield? Was it like decisions about, you know, specific stories to tell or not tell? Like what, like, how did the shielding of yourself that you wanted to give yourself, which I'm assuming as a kind of like care for yourself and a kind of protection for yourself, how did it work, or what kinds of things did you think about or choices did you make to do that?
Yeah, that'll work. That's good. That's a good question. Thanks. I'm would give everything to writing. I always have. I've been writing for ever since I can remember. You know what I mean? So I just have to write, and it isn't confessional. It's like I'm trying to think about what's happening. It's because of where I'm from, and my parents and stuff are great intellectuals, and so writing is a tool to make sense of the world. And so I have that relationship to writing. However, I was very conscious of what it means to write a book that will be, like we work in academia. And I really felt like I'm Puerto Rican. I went through a particularly vulnerable experience. And I'm gonna start my book that way in the first chapter. Why not? But I'm gonna be real careful about how I tell that experience, because it's precious to me and to the community that I'm a part of. And so that's happening at the same time, if that makes any sense. I wonder if how that resonates with you. I believe in the art, I believe in the writing in the world. Certainly, as I can't, Sonia Sanchez saved my life as a poet, right? Like, that's real. Women of color, as women of color, we get into those works and they shield us. I feel part of that tradition, but I withheld very carefully. And also, sorry if I'm going on too long. The last thing I'll say is that ethically, I wanted to tell start with myself and my sister and my father and my grandmother and this guy in the prologue going back to Camden. And I felt that together, our vulnerability, it means something when it goes together. It's the life of a community and a people. It's like, I'm not alone, right? And that is part of how I think about the protection of being a part of a place, right? And I don't experience my vulnerability alone. It's Puerto Rican people are beautiful, and when we go through these things, so there's a kind of togetherness at work. Monica, I could keep on talking, but I hope that that's helpful.
No, that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I don't know if Mercy, you have a question for Monica, but there is a question for Monica.
I got you. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Someone else has a question.
Okay.
I was like, answering your question.
So Sarah Bruno, one of the electricians for Electric Marronage, has a question. A question for Dr. Huerta. Shout out Chicago. Sarah is a Chicago Rican, so this takes all kinds, How did you get people to get your innovative ethnography that centers affect? Can you speak more on the methods of producing writing ethnographic poetics? And then after this, this disembodied hands reaching over in front of me has a hat with names in it, and we're going to pull from that hat the winners, of the books.
Yay, Chicago, first and foremost, and probably most importantly to what I'll say. So I didn't know that that's what I was doing. Is like one very honest answer. I did not know that I was doing ethnography, although the book has been taught at least in one, if not two, ethnographic methods classes, which has been like a wonderful delight to know. So that's one thing. To get it, I mean, so when I gave it to, thing number one, people didn't for a long time. So like I shopped this book or versions of drafts of this book for years and years, and everybody said no, that it wasn't narrative enough because they wanted me to write about my abuela and histories that were not mine to tell. So that's the first part, is that people didn't get it for years, like 5 years, 6 years. And then the second thing is that when I knew that this series was coming up at Duke and I was going to submit for it, that's when I wrote the preface. So very late, like I think the summer of 2019. So the preface was me like trying to situate it. And that's why that's why I'm quoting ethnographers, partially because Erica and Katie were I knew by then were the editors. So I like kind of figured out, how to situate it so that it made sense at a university press. And with these editors and those conversations in particular. And the writing, I mean, like Mercy, there was no time in my life when I ever wasn't writing or figuring out the world with words and myself, right? So like me and words and myself is my oldest relationship. And so in that sense, I think by the time that I knew that I was going to submit it to a university press, I think I trusted the writing. And that I think that's it, that I trusted that I had maybe worked out a way of writing the essays in it that could move across disciplines, which was also about reading beyond one discipline and having interests that were not about being in a discipline, and oriented towards being in the world and hoping that that something maybe could be useful beyond just me. So I think that's part of, I don't know if that answered the question, but I think that's part of what I would answer to like how I made people get it, is I worked on it for a very long time, and then I trusted the language.
Yeah, that's a really, I think these last two questions are really great questions to end on. I am so thankful for your time and your generosity in doing this. And before I say anything else, Sappy, the disembodied hand is coming here. I think you got to pick. I can't do it because, okay, my hands are here. So here's the first one. Nestor Spinoza gets a look. And then the second one, no, this can't go to the same, they're in the same household. All right, no. Okay. Olivia, who asked our first question. So I'm gonna track down these folks, Nestor and Olivia. And I am going to make sure that you get a copy of one of these two books. Thank you so much. I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to share anything.
No, thank you for sharing your thoughts, your histories, your legacies, your pain, your vulnerability, your happiness, your joy, and I hope to continue seeing these great books being published by women of color.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
and I want to thank Electric Marronage as well as the Women of Color initiatives for like hosting this. I'm so thankful to the both of you. You guys are fantastic. Oh, there's some Berkeley ES grad students here. Hi.
That's awesome.
And hi, everyone. Thank you so much. We're so appreciative of you and of your work in this world, really and truly. Yeah.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you,
Thank
Stephanie.
you, Yomaida.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Mercy.
it. Thank
It
you,
was
Monica.
nice